Hello, and welcome to another episode of Incremental Doom. Tonight, one more story from one of the masters of the English novel. The rumor of a spiritually troubled room draws travelers in. But who or what exactly is the spirit? How did it come to be confined? What history of cruelty and crime and cosmic justice lies behind its sentence? What is the prospect of release and peace? Answers and identities lie across the layers, in stories within the story. The Ghost in the Bride's Chamber by Charles Dickens. The house was a genuine old house of a very quaint description, teeming with old carvings and beams and panels, and having an excellent old staircase, with a gallery or upper staircase cut off from it by a curious fencework of old oak, or of the old Honduras mahogany wood. It was, and is, and will be, for many a long year to come, a remarkably picturesque house, and a certain grave mystery lurking in the depth of the old mahogany panels, as if they were so many deep pools of dark water, such indeed as they had been much among when they were trees, gave it a very mysterious character after nightfall. When Mr. Goodchild and Mr. Idle had first alighted at the door and stepped into the somber, handsome old hall, they had been received by half a dozen noiseless old men in black, all dressed exactly alike, who glided up the stairs with the obliging landlord and waiter, but without appearing to get into their way, or to mind whether they did or no, and who had filed off to the right and left on the old staircase as the guests entered their sitting room. It was then broad, bright day. But when Mr. Goodchild had said, when their door was shut, "Who on earth are these old men?" And afterwards, both on going out and coming in, he had noticed there were no old men to be seen. Neither had the old men, or any one of the old men, reappeared since. The two friends had passed a night in the house, but had seen nothing more of the old men. Mr. Goodchild, in rambling about it, had looked along passages and glanced in at doorways, but had encountered no old men. Neither did it appear that any old men were, by any member of the establishment, missed or expected. Another odd circumstance impressed itself on their attention. It was that the door of their sitting room was never left untouched for a quarter of an hour. It was opened with hesitation, opened with confidence, opened a little way, opened a good way, always clapped to again without a word of explanation. They were reading, they were writing, they were eating, they were drinking, they were talking, they were dozing. The door was always opened at an unexpected moment, and they looked towards it, and it was clapped to again, and no one was to be seen. When this had happened 50 times or so, Mr. Goodchild had said to his companion, jestingly, "I begin to think, Tom, there was something wrong with those 6 old men." Night had come again, and they had been writing for 2 or 3 hours. Writing, in short, a portion of the lazy notes from which these lazy sheets are taken. They had left off writing, and glasses were on the table between them. The house was closed and quiet. Around the head of Thomas Idle, as he lay upon his sofa, hovered light wreaths of fragrant smoke. The temples of Francis Goodchild, as he leaned back in his chair, with his 2 hands clasped behind his head and his legs crossed, were similarly decorated. They had been discussing several idle subjects of speculation, not omitting the strange old men, and were still so occupied when Mr. Goodchild abruptly changed his attitude to wind up his watch. They were just becoming drowsy enough to be stopped in their talk by any such slight check. Thomas Idle, who was speaking at the moment, paused and said, "How goes it?" "One," said Goodchild. As if he had ordered one old man, and the order were promptly executed. Truly, all orders were so in that excellent hotel. The door opened, and one old man stood there. He did not come in, but stood with the door in his hand. "One of the 6, Tom, at last," said Mr. Goodchild, in a surprised whisper. "Sir, your pleasure."
"Sir, your pleasure,"
said the old man. "I didn't ring."
"The bell did."
He said bell in a deep, strong way that would have expressed the church bell. "I had the pleasure, I believe, of seeing you yesterday," said Goodchild.
"I cannot undertake to say for certain,"
was the grim reply of one old man. "I think you saw me, did you not?"
Saw you?
said the old man.
Oh yes, I saw you. But I see many who never see me.
A chill, slow, earthy, fixed old man. A cadaverous old man of measured speech. An old man who seemed as unable to wink as if his eyelids had been nailed to his forehead. An old man whose eyes, 2 spots of fire, had no more motion than if they had been connected with the back of his skull by screws driven through it, and riveted and bolted outside among his gray hair. The night had turned so cold to Mr. Goodchild's sensations that he shivered. He remarked lightly and half apologetically, "I think someone is walking over my grave."
No,
said the weird old man.
there's no one there.
Mr. Goodchild looked at Idle, but Idle lay with his head enwreathed in smoke. "No one there?" said Goodchild.
There's no one at your grave, I assure you.
He had come in and shut the door, and now he sat down. He did not bend himself to sit, as other people do, but seemed to sit bolt upright, as if in water, until the chair stopped him. "My friend, Mr. Idle," said Goodchild, extremely anxious to introduce a third person into the conversation.
I am
Said the old man, without looking at him.
at Mr. Idle's service.
"If you are an old inhabitant of this place," Francis Goodchild resumed,
Yes.
"perhaps you can decide a point my friend and I were in doubt upon this morning. They hang condemned criminals at the castle, I believe,"
I believe so.
said the old man. "Are their faces turned toward that noble prospect?"
Your face is turned
replied the old man.
to the castle wall. When you are tied up, you see its stones expanding and contracting violently, and a similar expansion and contraction seem to take place in your own head and breast. Then there's a rush of fire and an earthquake, and the castle springs into the air, and you tumble down a precipice.
His cravat appeared to trouble him. He put his hand to his throat and moved his neck from side to side. He was an old man of a swollen character of face, and his nose was immovably hitched up on one side, as if by a little hook inserted in that nostril. Mr. Goodchild felt exceedingly uncomfortable, and began to think the night was hot and not cold. "A strong description, sir," he observed.
A strong sensation.
The old man rejoined. Again, Mr. Goodchild looked to Mr. Thomas Idle, but Thomas lay on his back with his face attentively turned toward the one old man, and made no sign. At this time, Mr. Goodchild believed that he saw threads of fire stretch from the old man's eyes to his own, and there attach themselves.
I must tell it to you.
Said the old man, with a ghastly and stony stare. "What?" asked Francis Goodchild.
You know where it took place. Yonder.
Whether he pointed to the room above, or the room below, or to any room in that old house, or to a room in some other old house in that old town, Mr. Goodchild was not, nor is, nor ever can be, sure. He was confused by the circumstance that the right forefinger of the one old man seemed to dip itself in one of the threads of fire, light itself, and make a fiery start in the air, as it pointed somewhere. Having pointed somewhere, it went out.
You know she was a bride,
said the old man. "I know they still send up bride cake," Mr. Goodchild faltered. "This is a very oppressive air."
She was a bride,
said the old man.
She was a fair, flaxen-haired, large-eyed girl who had no character, no purpose. A weak, credulous, incapable, helpless nothing. Not like her mother. No, it was her father whose character she reflected. Her mother had taken care to secure everything to herself, for her own life, when the father of this girl, a child at that time, died, of sheer helplessness, no other disorder, and then he renewed the acquaintance that had once subsisted between the mother and him. He had been put aside for the flaxen-haired, large-eyed man, or nonentity, with money. He could overlook that for money. He wanted compensation in money. So he returned to the side of that woman the mother, made love to her again, danced attendance on her, and submitted himself to her whims. She wreaked upon him every whim she had or could invent. He bore it, and the more he bore, the more he wanted compensation in money, and the more he was resolved to have it. But lo, before he got it, she cheated him. In one of her imperious states, she froze and never thawed again. She put her hands to her head one night, uttered a cry, stiffened, lay in that attitude certain hours, and died. And he had got no compensation from her in money yet. Blight and murrain on her, not a penny. He had hated her throughout that second pursuit, and had longed for retaliation on her. He now counterfeited her signature to an instrument, leaving all she had to leave to her daughter, 10 years old then, to whom the property passed absolutely, and appointing himself the daughter's guardian. When he slid it under the pillow of the bed on which she lay, he bent down in the deaf ear of death, and whispered, "Mistress Pride, I have determined a long time that, dead or alive, you must make me compensation in money." Now there were only two left, which two were he and the flaxen-haired, large-eyed, foolish daughter, who afterwards became the bride. He put her to school. In a secret, dark, oppressive, ancient house, he put her to school with a watchful and unscrupulous woman. "My worthy lady," he said, "here is a mind to be formed. Will you help me to form it?" She accepted the trust, for which she too wanted compensation in money, and had it. The girl was formed in the fear of him, and in the conviction that there was no escape from him. She was taught, from the first, to regard him as her future husband, the man who must marry her, the destiny that overshadowed her, the appointed certainty that could never be evaded. The poor fool was soft white wax in their hands, and took the impression that they put upon her. It hardened with time. It became a part of herself, inseparable from herself, and only to be torn away from her by tearing life away from her. 11 years she had lived in the dark house and its gloomy garden. He was jealous of the very light and air getting to her, and they kept her close. He stopped the wide chimneys, shaded the little windows, left the strong-stemmed ivy to wander where it would over the house front, the moss to accumulate on the untrimmed fruit trees in the red-walled garden, the weeds to overrun its green and yellow walks. He surrounded her with images of sorrow and desolation. He caused her to be filled with fears of the place and of the stories that were told of it, and then, on pretext of correcting them, to be left in it in solitude, or made to shrink about it in the dark. When her mind was most depressed and full of terrors, then he would come out of one of the hiding places from which he overlooked her, and present himself as her sole resource. Thus, by being from her childhood the one embodiment her life presented to her of power to coerce, and power to relieve, power to bind, and power to loose, the ascendancy over her weakness was secured. She was 21 years and 21 days old when he brought her home to the gloomy house, his half-witted, frightened, and submissive bride of 3 weeks. He had dismissed the governess by that time. What he had left to do, he could best do alone, and they came back upon a rain night to the scene of her long preparation. She turned to him upon the threshold as the rain was dripping from the porch, and said, "Oh, sir, it is the death watch ticking for me." "Well," he answered, "and if it were?" "Oh, sir," she returned to him, "look kindly on me, and be merciful to me. I beg your pardon. I will do anything you wish, if you will only forgive me." She was not worth hating. He felt nothing but contempt for her. But she had long been in the way, and he had long been wary, and the work was near its end and had to be worked out. "You fool," he said, "go up the stairs." She obeyed very quickly, murmuring, "I will do anything you wish." when he came into the bride's chamber, having been a little retarded by the heavy fastenings of the great door, for they were alone in the house, and he had arranged that the people who attended on them should come and go in the day. He found her withdrawn to the furthest corner, and there standing pressed against the panelling as if she would have shrunk through it, her flaxen hair all wild about her face, and her large eyes staring at him in vague terror. "What are you afraid of? Come and sit down by me." "I will do anything you wish. I beg your pardon, sir. Forgive me." Her monotonous tune as usual. "Ellen, here is a writing that you must write out tomorrow, in your own hand. You may as well be seen by others, busily engaged upon it. When you have written it all fairly, and corrected all mistakes, call in any 2 people there may be about the house, and sign your name to it before them. Then put it in your bosom to keep it safe, and when I sit here again tomorrow night, give it to me. I will do all with the greatest care. I will do anything you wish. Don't shake and tremble then. I will try my utmost not to do it, if you will only forgive me."
Next day, she sat down at her desk and did as she'd been told. He often passed in and out of the room to observe her, and always saw her slowly and laboriously writing, repeating to herself the words she copied, in appearance quite mechanically, and without caring or endeavouring to comprehend them, so that she did her task. He saw her follow the directions she had received, in all particulars, and at night, when they were alone again in the same bride's chamber, and he drew his chair to the hearth, she timidly approached him from her distant seat, took the paper from her bosom, and gave it into his hand. It secured all her possessions to him in the event of her death. He put her before him, face to face, that he might look at her steadily, and he asked her in so many plain words, neither fewer nor more, did she know that? There were spots of ink upon the bosom of her white dress, and they made her face look whiter, and her eyes looked larger as she nodded her head. There were spots of ink upon the hand with which she stood before him, nervously plaiting and folding her white skirts. He took her by the arm, and looked her yet more closely and steadily in the face.
"Now, die. I have done with you."
She shrank and uttered a low, suppressed cry.
"I'm not going to kill you. I will not endanger my life for yours. Die!"
He sat before her in the gloomy bride's chamber, day after day, night after night, looking the word at her when he did not utter it. As often as her large, unmeaning eyes were raised from the hands in which she rocked her head, to the stern figure sitting with crossed arms and knitted forehead in the chair, they read in it, "Die." When she dropped asleep in exhaustion, she was called back to shuddering consciousness by the whisper, "Die." When she fell upon her old entreaty to be pardoned, she was answered, "Die." When she had outwatched and outsuffered the long night, and the rising sun flamed into the sombre room, she heard it hailed with,
"Another day and not dead? Die!"
Shut up in the deserted mansion, aloof from all mankind, and engaged alone in such a struggle without any respite, it came to this, that either he must die, or she. He knew it very well, and concentrated his strength against her feebleness. Hours upon hours he held her by the arm, when her arm was black where he held it, and bade her die. It was done upon a windy morning before sunrise. He computed the time to be 4:30, but his forgotten watch had run down, and he could not be sure. She had broken away from him in the night, with loud and sudden cries, the first of that kind to which she had given vent, and he had put his hands over her mouth. Since then, she had been quiet in the corner of the panelling where she had sunk down, and he had left her, and had gone back with his folded arms and his knitted forehead to his chair. Paler in the pale light, More colorless than ever in the leaden dawn, he saw her coming, trailing herself along the floor towards him, a white wreck of hair and dress and wild eyes, pushing itself on by an irresolute and bending hand.
"Oh, forgive me. I will do anything. Oh, sir, pray tell me I may live."
Die!
"Are you so resolved? Is there no hope for me?"
Die!
Her large eyes strained themselves with wonder and fear. Wonder and fear changed to reproach. Reproach to blank nothing. It was done. He was not at first so sure it was done, but that the morning sun was hanging jewels in her hair. He saw the diamond, emerald, and ruby, glittering among it in little points, as he stood looking down at her, when he lifted her and laid her on the bed. She was soon laid in the ground. And now they were all gone, and he had compensated himself well. He had a mind to travel. Not that he meant to waste his money, for he was a pinching man and liked his money dearly, liked nothing else indeed, but that he had grown tired of the desolate house and wished to turn his back upon it and have done with it. But the house was worth money, and money must not be thrown away. He determined to sell it before he went. That it might look the less wretched and bring a better price, he hired some labourers to work in the overgrown garden, to cut out the dead wood, trim the ivy that drooped in heavy masses over the windows and gables, and clear the walks in which the weeds were growing mid-leg high. He worked himself along with them. He worked later than they did, and, one evening at dusk, was left working alone, with his billhook in his hand. One autumn evening, when the bride was 5 weeks dead.
"It grows too dark to work longer,"
he said to himself.
"I must give over for the night."
He detested the house, and was loath to enter it. He looked at the dark porch waiting for him like a tomb, and felt that it was an accursed house. Near to the porch, and near to where he stood, was a tree whose branches waved before the old bay window of the bride's chamber, where it had been done. The tree swung suddenly, and made him start. It swung again, although the night was still. Looking up into it, he saw a figure among the branches. It was the figure of a young man. The face looked down, as his looked up. The branches cracked and swayed. The figure rapidly descended and slid upon its feet before him. A slender youth of about her age, with long, light brown hair.
"What thief are you?"
he said, seizing the youth by the collar. The young man, in shaking himself free, swung him a blow with his arm across the face and throat. They closed, but the young man got from him and stepped back crying, with great eagerness and horror, "Don't touch me! I would as lief be touched by the devil!" He stood still with his billhook in his hand, looking at the young man. For the young man's look was the counterpart of her last look, and he had not expected ever to see that again. "I am no thief. Even if I were, I would not have a coin of your wealth, even if it would buy me the Indies. You murderer!" "What?" "I climbed it," said the young man, pointing up into the tree. "For the first time, nigh 4 years ago. I climbed it to look at her. I saw her. I spoke to her. I have climbed it many a time to watch and listen for her. I was a boy, hidden among its leaves, when from that bay window she gave me this." He showed a tress of flaxen hair, tied with a mourning ribbon. "Her life," said the young man, "was a life of mourning. She gave me this as a token of it, and a sign that she was dead to everyone but you. If I had been older, if I had seen her sooner, I might have saved her from you. But she was fast in the web when I first climbed the tree, and what could I do then to break it?" In saying those words, he burst into a fit of sobbing and crying, weakly at first, Then passionately,
"Murderer! I climbed the tree on the night when you brought her back. I heard her from the tree speak of the death watch at the door. I was 3 times in the tree while you were shut up with her, slowly killing her. I saw her from the tree, lie dead upon her bed. I have watched you from the tree for proofs and traces of your guilt. The manner of it is a mystery to me yet, but I will pursue you until you have rendered up your life to the hangman. You shall never until then be rid of me. I loved her. I can know no relenting towards you. Murderer, I loved her."
the youth was bareheaded, his hat having fluttered away in his descent from the tree. He moved towards the gate. He had to pass him to get to it. There was breadth for 2 old-fashioned carriages abreast, and the youth's abhorrence, openly expressed in every feature of his face and limb of his body, and very hard to bear, had verge enough to keep itself at a distance in. He, by which I mean the other, had not stirred hand or foot since he had stood still to look at the boy. He faced round now to follow him with his eyes. As the back of his bare, light-brown head was turned to him, he saw a red curve stretch from his hand to it. He knew, before he threw the billhook, where it had alighted. I say had alighted, and not would alight, for, to his clear perception, the thing was done before he did it. It cleft the head, and it remained there, and the boy lay on his face. He buried the body in the night, at the foot of the tree. As soon as it was light in the morning, he worked at turning up all the ground near the tree, and hacking and hewing at the neighboring bushes and undergrowth. When the laborers came, there was nothing suspicious, and nothing suspected. But he had, in a moment, defeated all his precautions and destroyed the triumph of the scheme he had so long concerted, and so successfully worked out. He had got rid of the bride, and had acquired her fortune without endangering his life. But now, for a death by which he had gained nothing, he had evermore to live with a rope around his neck. Beyond this, he was chained to the house of gloom and horror, which he could not endure. Being afraid to sell it or to quit it, lest discovery should be made, he was forced to live in it. He hired 2 old people, man and wife, for his servants, and dwelt in it, and dreaded it. His great difficulty, for a long time, was the garden. Whether he should keep it trim, whether he should suffer it to fall into its former state of neglect, what would be the least likely way of attracting attention to it? He took the middle course of gardening himself in his evening leisure, and of then calling the old servant-man to help him, but of never letting him work there alone. And he made himself an arbour over against the tree, where he could sit and see that it was safe. As the seasons changed, and the tree changed, his mind perceived dangers that were always changing. In the leafy time, he perceived that the upper boughs were growing into the form of the young man, that they made the shape of him exactly, sitting in a forked branch swinging in the wind. In the time of the falling leaves, he perceived that they came down from the tree, forming telltale letters on the path, or that they had a tendency to heap themselves into a churchyard mound above the grave. In the winter, when the tree was bare, he perceived that the boughs swung at him the ghost of the blow the young man had given, and that they threatened him openly. In the spring, when the sap was mounting in the trunk, he asked himself, were the dried-up particles of blood mounting with it, to make out more obviously this year than last the leaf-screened figure of the young man swinging in the wind? However, he turned his money over, and still over. He was in the dark trade. the gold dust trade, and most secret trades that yielded great returns. In 10 years, he had turned his money over so many times that the traders and shippers who had dealings with him absolutely did not lie, for once, when they declared that he had increased his fortune 1,200%. He possessed his riches 100 years ago, when people could be lost easily. He had heard who the youth was from hearing of the search that was made after him, but it died away, and the youth was forgotten. The annual round of changes in the tree had been repeated 10 times since the night of the burial at its foot, when there was a great thunderstorm over this place. It broke at midnight and roared until morning. The first intelligence he heard from his old serving man that morning was that the tree had been struck by lightning. It had been riven down the stem in a very surprising manner, and the stem lay in 2 blighted shafts, one resting against the house and one against a portion of the old red garden wall in which its fall had made a gap. The physio went down the tree to a little above the earth, and there stopped. There was great curiosity to see the tree, and, with most of his former fears revived, he sat in his arbour, grown quite an old man, watching the people who came to see it. They began to come in such dangerous numbers that he closed his garden gate and refused to admit any more. But there were certain men of science who travelled from a distance to examine the tree, and, in an evil hour, he let them in. Blight and murrain on them, let them in. They wanted to dig up the ruin by the roots, and closely examine it and the earth about it. Never while he lived. They offered money for it. They, men of science, whom he could have bought by the gross with a scratch of his pen. He showed them the garden gate again, and locked and barred it. But they were bent on doing what they wanted to do, and they bribed the old serving man, a thankless wretch who regularly complained when he received his wages of being underpaid, and they stole into the garden by night with their lanterns, picks, and shovels, and fell to at the tree. He was lying in a turret room on the other side of the house. The bride's chamber had been unoccupied ever since, but he soon dreamed of picks and shovels, and got up. He came to an upper window on that side, whence he could see their lanterns, and them, and the loose earth in a heap which he had himself disturbed and put back when it was last turned to the air. It was found. They had that minute lighted on it. They were all bending over it. One of them said, "The skull is fractured." And another, "See here the bones." And another, "See here the clothes." And then the first struck in again, and said, "A rusty billhook." He became sensible, next day, that he was already put under a strict watch, and that he could go nowhere without being followed. Before a week was out, he was taken and laid in hold. The circumstances were gradually pieced together against him, with a desperate malignity and an appalling ingenuity. But see the justice of men, and how it was extended to him. He was further accused of having poisoned that girl in the bride's chamber. He, who had carefully and expressly avoided imperiling a hair of his head for her, and who had seen her die of her own incapacity. There was doubt for which of the 2 murders he should be first tried, but the real one was chosen, and he was found guilty and cast for death. Bloodthirsty wretches! They would have made him guilty of anything, so set they were upon having his life. His money could do nothing to save him, and he was hanged. I am he, and I was hanged at Lancaster Castle with my face to the wall 100 years ago.
At this terrific announcement, Mr. Goodchild tried to rise and cry out, but the 2 fiery lines extending from the old man's eyes to his own kept him down, and he could not utter a sound. His sense of hearing, however, was acute, and he could hear the clock strike 2. No sooner had he heard the clock strike 2 than he saw before him 2 old men. 2. The eyes of each connected with his eyes by 2 films of fire, each exactly like the other, each addressing him at precisely one and the same instant, each gnashing the same teeth in the same head, with the same twisted nostril above them, and the same suffused expression around it. 2 old men, differing in nothing, equally distinct to the sight, the copy no fainter than the original, the second as real as the first.
"At what time,"
said the 2 old men,
"did you arrive at the door below?"
"At 6, and there were 6 old men upon the stairs." Mr. Goodchild having wiped the perspiration from his brow, or tried to do it, the 2 old men proceeded in one voice, and in the singular number.
"I had been anatomized, but had not yet had my skeleton put together and rehung on an iron hook, when it began to be whispered that the bride's chamber was haunted. It was haunted, and I was there. We were there. She and I were there. I, in the chair upon the hearth, she, a white wreck again, trailing itself towards me on the floor. But I was the speaker no more, and the one word that she said to me from midnight until dawn was, 'Live.' The youth was there, likewise, in the tree outside the window, coming and going in the moonlight, as the tree bent and gave. He has, ever since, been there, peeping in at me in my torment, revealing to me by snatches, in the pale lights and slaty windows where he comes and goes, bareheaded, a billhook standing edgewise in his hair. In the bride's chamber, every night, from midnight until dawn, 1 month in the year excepted, as I am going to tell you, he hides in the tree, and she comes towards me on the floor, always approaching, never coming nearer, always visible as if by moonlight, whether the moon shines or no, always saying, from midnight until dawn, her one word, 'Live.' But in the month wherein I was forced out of this life, this present month of 30 days, the bride's chamber is empty and quiet. Not so my old dungeon. Not so the rooms where I was restless and afraid 10 years. Both are fitfully haunted then. At 1 in the morning, I am what you saw me when the clock struck that hour, 1 old man. At 2 in the morning, I am 2 old men. At 3, I am 3. By 12 at noon, I am 12 old men, 1 for every 100% of old gain. Every one of the 12 with 12 times my old power of suffering and agony. From that hour until 12 at night, I, 12 old men in anguish and fearful foreboding, wait for the coming of the executioner. At 12 at night, I, 12 old men turned off, swing invisible outside Lancaster Castle, with 12 faces to the wall. When the bride's chamber was first haunted, it was known to me that this punishment would never cease until I could make its nature and my story known to 2 living men together. I waited for the coming of 2 living men together into the bride's chamber, years upon years. It was infused into my knowledge, of the means I am ignorant, that if 2 living men, with their eyes open, could be in the bride's chamber at 1 in the morning, they would see me sitting in my chair. At length, the whispers that the room was spiritually troubled brought 2 men to try the adventure. I was scarcely struck upon the hearth at midnight, I come there as if the lightning blasted me into being, when I heard them ascending the stairs. Next, I saw them enter. One of them was a bold, gay, active man in the prime of life, some 45 years of age. The other, a dozen years younger. They brought provisions with them in a basket and bottles. A young woman accompanied them, with wood and coals for the lighting of the fire. When she had lighted it, the bold, gay, active man accompanied her along the gallery outside the room, to see her safely down the staircase, and came back laughing. He locked the door, examined the chamber, put out the contents of the basket on the table before the fire, little recking of me in my appointed station on the hearth close to him, and filled the glasses and ate and drank. His companion did the same, and was as cheerful and confident as he, though he was the leader. When they had supped, they laid pistols on the table, turned to the fire, and began to smoke their pipes of foreign make. They had travelled together, and had been much together, and had an abundance of subjects in common. In the midst of their talking and laughing, the younger man made a reference to the leader's being always ready for any adventure, that one or any other. He replied in these words, "Not quite so, Dick. If I am afraid of nothing else, I am afraid of myself." His companion, seeming to grow a little dull, asked him, in what sense? How? "Why, thus," he returned. "Here's a ghost to be disproved. Well, I cannot answer for what my fancy might do if I were alone here, or what tricks my senses might play with me if they had me to themselves. But in company with another man, and especially with Dick, I would consent to outface all the ghosts that were ever of in the universe." "I had not the vanity to suppose I was of so much importance tonight," said the other. "Of so much," rejoined the leader, more seriously than he had spoken yet, "that I would, for the reason I have given, on no account have undertaken to pass the night here alone." It was within a few minutes of 1. The head of the younger man had drooped when he had made his last remark, and it drooped lower now. "Keep awake, Dick," said the leader gaily. "The small hours are the worst." He tried, but his head dropped again. "Dick," urged the leader, "keep awake." "I can't," he indistinctly muttered. "I don't know what strange influence is stealing over me. I can't." His companion looked at him with a sudden horror, and I, in my different way, felt a new horror also, for it was on the stroke of 1, and I felt that the second watcher was yielding to me, and that the curse was upon me that I must send him to sleep. "Get up and walk, Dick," cried the leader. "Try." It was in vain to go behind the slumber's chair and shake him. 1 o'clock sounded, and I was present to the elder man, and he stood transfixed before me. To him alone I was obliged to relate my story, without hope of benefit. To him alone I was an awful phantom making a quite useless confession. I foresee it will ever be the same. The 2 living men together will never come to release me. When I appear, the senses of one of the 2 will be locked in sleep. He will neither see nor hear me. My communication will ever be made to a solitary listener, and will ever be unserviceable. Woe! Woe! Woe!
As the 2 old men with these words wrung their hands, it shot into Mr. Goodchild's mind that he was in the terrible situation of being virtually alone with the spectre, and that Mr. Idle's immovability was explained by his having been charmed asleep at 1 o'clock. In the terror of this sudden discovery, which produced an indescribable dread, he struggled so hard to get free from the 4 fiery threads that he snapped them after he had pulled them out to a great width. Being then out of bonds, he caught up Mr. Idle from the sofa and rushed downstairs with him. For more tales of literary horror to unsettle you, follow this podcast. To support this podcast and receive additional material, such as original music and notes on the stories and episodes, visit its source and become a paid subscriber at incrementallyyours.substack.com. Incremental Doom, Exponential Entertainment. I'm Edgar.